All right, everyone, hello. Hi there, my name's Shauna Gordon-McKeon. I'm gonna be leading this tutorial today. I wanna introduce my two very helpful TAs, Ashish and Aaron, up at the front of the room. Thank you, Ashish and Aaron. So as I said before, but a couple people haven't come in yet, we have these blue and pink sticky notes to make it extra easy for us to help you if you get stuck. So the blue sticky notes, we're not gonna use them a ton, but we're gonna use them for things like we just did, where I give you an instruction, you take some time to do it, and the blue sticky note is a way to say, hey, I'm all done, we're ready to keep going. The pink sticky note is a way for you to ask for help without having to keep your arm in the air. I would recommend if the TAs are just kind of sitting in the corner, you might also want to wave your arm in the air to get their attention. But if they're wandering around, you can put the pink thing up and they'll just keep their eyes peeled for the next person with the pink sticky. And I will also try to help as well. So you should all have the basics set up from the repository that I gave you at the top of the handout. So that should look a bit like this. If you haven't, then keep that pink sticky note up so that Ashish and Aaron can come and help you. But it looks like everyone's pretty much good to go. So the first thing we're gonna do is I just wanna do a quick review of the official tutorial. So the goal of this tutorial is to say, okay, I finished the official tutorial, I learned the very basics, but I'm not really sure where to go next. So let's just review what we learned in the official tutorial quickly to make sure that we're all on the same page. So in the tutorial, we learned some basics for starting a new project. So I'm just gonna quickly CD into a different directory so that I'm not messing up the cloned repository as I demonstrate these things. So for instance, we learned the basic command of well, maybe actually I'll go into, so this is the basic command. I'm not actually gonna start a separate virtual env, but this is the basic command to create a new project. And then the basic command to create a new app within a project is Python manage.py mysite. And you'll almost never use that Django admin prompt. You'll almost always be using Python manage.py in order to do these sort of administrative tasks. So I'm going to go back into CD desktop. There we go. Back into the tutorial, start my virtual environment. Activate. So once you've got your project all set up to run it, you go into the mysite directory. You gotta make sure you're in the directory that has manage.py, and do Python manage.py run server. Once you do that, you should see a prompt giving you a location where you can go to and see your project. So I'm gonna make a copy of that. I'm gonna go here. And normally it will not look like this. I've created a special landing page so you knew that you were all set up. The other thing you need to do is to create a super user. So I'm gonna create another terminal window separately. Make it big, maybe not that big. So you should go ahead and do this command, this create super user command. And this is going to create a user in your database with administrative access. So this user that you're creating will be able to log into the admin site. Will be a staff member in the database. Right, always forget to start my virtual environments. Oh, okay. So before you create your super user, so I'm getting an operational error here that says no such table. And because this is a Django provided item in the database, I know that it should be there. I don't need to create the table myself. So what's missing is that I need to run the migrations to create the database in the first place. So you can type Python manage.py migrations. Migrate, sorry. remembering the syntax for everything is half the battle. Well, that's what Google is for. So once you've run migrate, you've created your database, and now you can create the super user within the database. There we go. You can skip the email address if you want to, but you do need a password. And you'll want to remember this password because we're going to use it to log into the admin later. So now if you go to the admin, you can test that your super user has been created. And you'll see the basic site that was created with the questions item and the polls app from the official tutorial. So another way to access some of the objects and data you'll be creating is through the shell. And again, it's a manage.py command. And so you can import your models through the shell. For instance, we can import that question model. There we go. Got to give it the name of the app. So from polls.models import question to import the model specified in your models.py. And then you can work with these models in various ways. So you could do something like question.objects.all to get all questions in the database. It's empty because we haven't added, we just created the database. There's no question data in there. So we can create an object. So one way to do that is with this syntax. So I know from looking at my models.py, that there are two fields on this model, the question text and the publication date. So when I create it, I'm going to provide those values here. Now, because I'm creating it and not saving it, I don't actually have to provide the values right here. So I'll just put the question text here. What's your favorite programming language? So, and then when I look at that model, I see the question text. Now, to save a model, you can just do this .save notation. But I get an error when I do that because I haven't provided that other piece of information. But the shell gives you the missing, lets you access those fields, and so I can put a separate date here. Actually, let me import time zone. From date time, import time zone. Great. So I have my Q pub date, and I'm just going to say that the time zone, or the date is this right this moment with this command. Unexpected. I think that's maybe a different time zone. Yeah. Django.utils port time zone. There we go. There we go. Thank you. And now when I save, it won't give me that error because I have provided both of the required fields. If you already know that you have all of the information, you don't have to do this multi-step process. You can do a single command with question.objects.create. And then you can provide the same, the question text. What's your favorite Python library? And again, you can do and so now when I check for all of the objects, I've got 2 objects in my query set. And this same syntax can be used in your code as well as in your shell. So how you want to create your things, whether you want to do it via the admin, whether you want to do it via the shell, up to you. Any questions so far? Feel free to put those pink stickies up if you need to. Additionally, you can do filtering on your objects. So for instance, question object filter. Something I find myself using frequently is the for string variables the filter contains. So for instance, let's go with language. So this is only showing the one with the text, what's your favorite programming language? The other question doesn't have language in there, so it's not showing up. You can add new methods to models.py that are available in the shell, as well as in your views and other places around the code. It's also common to add a string method so that when you see the object, it looks nicer. So you can see that here with the string method where it returns the question text. Otherwise, it returns a sort of ugly object name and then like a number. Another thing that got covered in the tutorial is basic relationships. So you can see here that question is connected to, or sorry, choice is connected to question through a foreign key relationship. So a foreign key is a fancy word for many-to-one relationship. So there can be many choices for a single question, but each choice only has one question, but each question has many choices. So this is one of several different types of relationships that you can specify. We saw the admin here. You access the admin through the URLs .py. So there's sort of two levels of the URLs. There's the My Sites level. And the My Site level URLs.py, the project level URLs.py, allows you to include the URLs from your own apps, from third-party apps, and from Django's inbuilt apps. And so we include the admin URLs in the My Site URLs.py, and then we specify what we actually want to see through an admin.py. So this is specifying what we see for the polls app, and the Django tutorial walked us through some pretty fancy ways of looking at things. So we can use inlines to add choices in the question. Instead of adding questions and choices separately, we can add choices as we add questions. We can do a little search. There's a little sidebar. There's a lot of fancy looking stuff. All right, what else is there? And then finally, to sort of go over the workflow of the sort of overview of how Django processes requests. So when Django gets a user's request, we start off with the URLs. Again, we start at this highest level URLs with My Site, and it starts looking through the path of the URL that was given to it. So when it comes across polls, it says, okay, I need to farm this off to the polls app. If it comes across admin, it needs to farm this off to the admin app. And every once in a while, as you work in Django, you'll accidentally not realize that you've duplicated something and it'll be fed off to something before you mean it to. But most of the time this works pretty well. Wow, that's far over to the side. So in any case, if we've got our polls here, let's say we want to go to this this polls app here. So that's the URL is the base/polls/2. So it gets to polls and it farms us off to the other URLs, the URLs for polls, in the polls directory. And then it looks for the first match from the top to the bottom. And it says, oh, here's an integer, so it must want to go to this detail view. So each path item in a URL pattern has the URL content itself on the left. It used to have regular expressions. Now in Django 2, it has this, to me, slightly more readable formatting. So this matches the URLs coming in. And then it says, for that match, what view do I use? And then additionally, there's a name. And this name is useful so that we can reference it in throughout our code, so we don't have to hard code our URLs. We can just say, send people to detail, and the actual URL of detail can change however we want it without us having to go into that code and change it there. So it sends us to our views, and we have our detail view here. And you can see here that the detail view specifies a model, and it specifies a template. So it's going to take the data associated with the model and take the formatting associated with the template, smush them all together, and return a response to that original request. And that's the sort of overall flow of a request coming into Django. All right, so that is my sort of like quick overview of the official tutorial. Any questions before we get going? No? Great. So let's get started with adding to our app. So Django comes with this built-in user model. You can see it in the shell. If you type from django.contrib.auth.models import user. This is the kind of stuff I constantly have to Google. The only reason I know that is because I prepared. So if I do user.objects.all, I can see that I have my super user that I created. And you should have a user as well because you created your super users. So what are some ways that we can find out about what methods or attributes are available on this object? So we can use the shell to do like a tab complete to see, okay, there's like a PK. All Django objects will have a PK, which is primary key. Functions very much like an ID, but is separate from an ID. So you can see that there's a lot of different options on the user. What are some other ways? Does anyone else, like if you don't want to open up the shell for whatever reason, what's another way that you could find out about this user model? Yes, you could Google it. Where do you think you'd end up if you Googled it? Yeah. Oh. Am I actually, no, I totally forgot to PyCon staff. Oh, I'm not a staff member. I don't think I actually need the PyCon. There we go. But we'll just connect just in case. So yeah, right. So one of the first things you should see is the Django docs, and the Django docs are great, very detailed. I'm a fan. Another way, does anyone have another way that you could learn about the user model? It's kind of a limited way, but you can learn some basic stuff. Say that again. Yeah, you could do a help. You could do help. And then another way you can do it, and I use this for like finding out basic things like fields that are available on like third-party models, is just to go into the admin. So if you go into the admin for users, you can see that there's more than just username. There's personal info. There's a whole set of permissions that come with the inbuilt user model. There's the date you joined. It gives your last login. So if I'm not looking for anything too complicated, and like 9 times out of 10, I just want to know what fields are available, like what fields that I can change, then the admin is a real quick way to do that. So okay, we've got this user model. Let's use it. Let's start by using it. So let's create a user list view. So we're going to do that. We're going to go into our views. I'm going to delete some of these. So we're going to go into the views, and I'm going to create a new view. I'm going to call it users view. Does anyone know? So I'm going to make it a class-based view because I default to class-based views for everything. We'll talk a little bit more about the distinctions and when you might want to use one versus the other. Does anyone have a guess for what type of class-based view we want to inherit from? Yeah. No, so that's an answer to the question of which model I want to inherit from. So right now, I'm not going to do anything with the user to extend the user just yet. I'm just going to create a view that displays a list of all of the users. So what generic view might I want to inherit from? Yes, list view. And you can see that we've done that already with our index view to show our questions. So sometimes I just copy and paste from previous ones, but let's type it out here, generic list view. Is this big enough for everyone to see? Great. And so there's going to be some required things for us to do, but for now I'm just going to add this ellipses so the code runs, and I'm going to see what errors it gives me. So I've got this users list view. I want to access it in through the browser. So what do I need to do in order to access it through the browser? I need to create a how can I request it as a user? I need to add an entry in urls.py, yes. So I'm going to put this within my polls app. Logically, it could go in, you might end up wanting to put it in a separate app if you end up doing a lot of stuff with your user accounts. But for now, we're just going to put it in the polls app. So I'm going to create, I'm just going to call it users. And I called it users view. And I need to make sure to add this .asView call so that it's presenting this class object as a view. Forget that sometimes and then get an error. And we'll give it the name users. So now that we've got that, I should be able to go into my browser, and then within the polls app, so after the site name /polls, I'll add a request to go to users. Excellent. So I'm getting an error message of exception type improperly configured, and it's telling me exactly what's going wrong. It's saying the user's view is missing a query set, and it gives me 3 different ways to fix this. I can define a model, I can define a query set, or I can override the method getQuerySet. So the simplest way to do this is to just set the model. So you can do this by just typing, setting the attribute here. But you'll notice that I'm having the little red squiggly that means that my IDE has no idea what I'm talking about when I give this variable name. So I have to import it. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to use the same thing we did in the shell, or the same import statement from the shell. Import user. And now that that's set, I'm going to try again. See what happens. No, I got another exception. This time it says template does not exist. So there's a second required parameter I'm missing, which is the template that the view needs to use. So I'm going to give it the template name of polls/users.html. And when I do that, I still get a template does not exist. And that is because I have not actually created a template. I just told it what template I theoretically wanted it to use. So let's go ahead and make that template. So I'm going to go into the templates folder for the polls app. I'm actually going to duplicate this index because it's like a pretty nice setup. It's pretty much what I want. I just got to adapt it a little bit. So I'm going to duplicate this, make a copy, and I'll just call it users.html. No, the wrong thing. Okay, so we need to make a couple of changes here. The first thing we want to do is change this reference. It says if latest question list. So we don't have a latest question list. So what do we want to call it? So by default, Django calls any list. You can reference it with object underscore list. You can also reference it if it's a model. If it's a model view, you can reference it with the model name underscore list. So in this case, the model is user. So you can reference it with user list. So you can pick either one. So instead of if question and latest question list, I'm going to change this to if for user in user list. I'm going to delete this extra bit here. And instead of referencing the variable or the data question.question text, I'm going to reference just user and maybe username. We've got a nice string representation, so if we just give it the object, we will see something that's pretty useful. But oftentimes, when you're actually making a project, you want to explicitly say which field you want to display instead of using the default representation. Sometimes it works. I'll change this so it gives a useful error message. No users are available. So now I have created this template, and when I go back to the browser, I actually see my list of users, which is not a very long list, but it's a list. If you have not gotten to this page with your list of viewers, please put a little pink sticky note up so we know to come help you. Aaron, there's. Yes. Excellent. Yeah, if you're needing help, you should also feel free to ask the person next to you. You never know. The person next to you might, in fact, be able to help you. All right, so now we've got our list of users. But even though there's all this stuff that Django automatically provides on the user model, there might be additional things that we want. So for instance, maybe you want to have people be able to put like a bio up, or link to their Twitter profile or their website, or add a image of themselves. There's all sorts of things you might want to associate with the user. And so one of the most common ways to associate new things with the user is to create a separate profile model and connect the two of them together. There's actually a bunch of different ways that people do this. They can extend something called abstract user. They can use something called a proxy model. There's a variety of more complicated things that you can do. We're going to start with we're going to use the simplest option here, but as you get more comfortable with Django, you might want to explore those other options if your project, if the approach that we're using here doesn't seem like a good match for your project in the future. There are other options. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new profile model. So we're going to, anyone know where we want to put that? Yeah, the models.py. Right, so you want to go into the polls app, not into the my site. So it should be my site/polls, not my site/my site. Yeah, the structure that Django uses is a little bit confusing because it has this initial very high-level my site folder, and then within it they duplicate the name. So you want to be in the polls app in the models.py, and we're going to go ahead and just create a new model. Oh, class profile models.model. And we want to start by creating a relationship to this user. So previously we used foreign key, but we don't really want a foreign key here, because foreign key here says we can have a whole bunch of different things for one of the thing that we're connecting to. And we don't want to have like 10 different profiles for each user. Like, I can see a use case in which you'd want that, but the vast majority of the time you just want one profile per one user. So you want to use what's called a one-to-one field. So you do user one-to-one field, and you specify the model that you want to connect to. And again, I have to import it. And now that I've imported it, it should work. There is an additional type of relationship. So we have our one-to-one, and we have our many-to-one. There's also the option to do a many-to-many. So if you have, oh God, what's an example? If you have a bunch of authors and a bunch of posts, and you can have multiple authors on a post, then each post can have many authors, and each author will presumably have many posts. And so that's the kind of model where you want to have many-to-many. And those are your three basic types of relationships: one-to-one, many-to-many, and many-to-one, also known as foreign key. So OK, we've created this model. Let's take a look at, it's giving us an error. So it's missing a required positional argument on delete. So whenever we create a new relationship, we need to specify what we want Django to do if we delete the related object. So if we delete the user, what do we want to do with the profile? And there's actually a bunch of different options. You can set it to null so that the profile has a null user. You can give it a default value to use. You can raise an error so that it's impossible to delete one without the other, although that's usually not a good idea. What I almost always end up doing is specifying cascade, which is a sort of evocative way of saying that if the user is deleted, also delete the profile. And depending on how your models are set up, it's often a one-way relationship where, no, don't report it. Where so for instance, you've got an author and there's posts. If you delete the author, you might want to delete all of their posts because you're just getting rid of their information in the database. But probably if you delete a post, you don't want to delete the author. So often with your relationships, what you do for onDelete is one way. So, and it's because it's set. You can see it's set here. Because it's set on the profile model. It doesn't say anything about what to do. It just assumes if you delete profile, leave the user there, because we're setting this on the profile model. So now we've got a profile model. Well, let's actually, now that it's running, we need to actually create the model. So I'm going to get out of the shell here, and I'm going to go ahead and migrate my database. So first, I need to make the migrations. And when you run make migrations, it creates a migrations file. Unless you spend a lot of time working with migrations on you can go a long time using Django before you do anything with the migrations. So this is mostly just to show you that it exists. But every once in a while, especially if you're working with a lot of other people and you get into some weird state, you might have to go into and manually edit these migrations files. So that's why they're created, as a way to help version control and keep track of the changes to your database. So you're tracking your database changes along with the code changes. So you separately make the migrations, and then once your migrations file is created, you migrate the database. And it's only once you run the migrate command that your database actually changes. So if you make migrations and then you decide for whatever reason that you want to alter what you've decided in models.py, you can just delete that migrations file and create a new one. Manage.py, not migrate. So now I've got this profile. And if you, so I can go into this user's template, and instead of going to the user.username, I can go to the user.profile. But it's blank. Why is that? Anyone know? What step have I missed? Yes, I've not actually created a profile. This is the kind of stuff that always gets me, where I'm like, I've done like 2/3 of it, and I'm just like, why isn't it working? Because there's all the tiny steps that go together. So we need to actually create a profile. And let's create it through the admin this time. So we can go to the admin, but how do we access it in the admin? We have to edit admin.py. So we'll skip doing any of the fancy stuff we learned about in the official tutorial and just do we'll simply register it. And once we do that, it should appear in the admin. So we can go into the profiles and then add it by hand. All you need to do is specify the user to connect it to, and you should only have one user so far. Yeah. So the simple steps here are just to make sure you import the model and then do admin.site.register and then the model name, in this case, profile. So I have my profile here, and I can save it. So if we go back to our users template, we now see the profile. Of course, we haven't given it a string representation, so it's not a very helpful. We just see profile object 1, but we know that we've got it, we've created it, and now we're displaying it. So let's add a little bit more to this profile. Let's give it a string representation. Let's give it some useful fields, because that was the whole point of adding the profile. So you want to go to the models.py, go to your profile model. So let's start by adding a string representation. Actually, let's start by adding a string representation. So this is a bit circuitous, but let's give it the representation of the profile.user.username. And when we are referring to the class itself, we want to actually use self instead of the object name. And so you can access related fields in the methods of an object just in this way. So it's you might sometimes get errors if you have a non-required field. So if you created a separate profile model and you didn't create the user to connect it to, then this string representation would break every time you tried to display that profile. So when you're using related fields, you want to either make sure that you're going to have that it always has that relationship specified, or you want to provide an alternative or a way to catch the error. Let's also add another field. So I want to add a bio. So let's specify that as a character field, and you can see that right up here, the choice model also has a character field, so I can just copy that. And let's just specify that and see what happens. Yes. So I just moved over, when everything is running well, I just see this, this prompt here. But you can access a lot of errors just by looking over it where you have Python manage.py run server running. And right away, I'm getting an error saying that character fields must define a max length. So many fields have a required field that you have to specify. In this case, let's say, let's give people 100 characters to define a bio. Okay, so I'm not getting an error message here, so that's nice. Let's go ahead and make some migrations files. So when we do that, we get an error messagey thing. It's not quite an error message, it's kind of an error message. It's a prompt that's basically saying you already have a profile in the database, and your new field doesn't have a default value specified. So how do I know when I'm adding this new field in the database, how do I know what to use for that existing row? Like, what is the bio for the profile you already created? There's no default. So there's two different ways to define a default. One is to provide one now. And when you do that, that becomes a part of the migrations file. My preference, whenever possible, is to select the second option, quit, and let me add a default in models.py. Because I am much more likely to understand what I've done months or years in the future if it's in my models.py than if it's in a migrations file. Because I spend so little time looking at the migrations file, I probably will never remember that it's even there. So let's go ahead and add a default value. So I'm going to add a default value of please add a profile, which is terrible UX. So, but for now, it serves our purposes. And now when I do the migrations, it should let me do that. And once I've made my migrations, I can go ahead and actually run the migrations. We could, if we want to, add the bio to the string representation. I am a fan of just putting a ton of data in the string representation. Like, I try to make it as short as possible, but I'll try to throw in like the primary key, like anything useful, because this often the string representation shows up in an error message. So I try to use the string representation for like for me as a developer and any of my colleagues, and then never reference that actually in the templates because you don't want to really be showing users this like long string of data. That's just my preference. It's worked out for me so far. So let's go ahead and refresh. So we get the new string representation. And we can go ahead and show this field. We can show this separately. So for instance, I'm going to user.profile, profile.bio. So you'll need to use this. This thing needs to be exact to match, but the stuff I put around it is just how I formatted how it's going to look. So that doesn't need to be the same. But you'll want to use the double quotes to indicate a variable, and then you can go from the user to the related object of the profile and access a specific field on the profile. Now when I refresh, I get that default amount. Cool. Does anyone have any questions? If you want to play around later, you can go to model field reference. There should be a link to that on your handout. And that's just got a whole bunch of different fields. Yeah, whole bunch of different field types. Boolean fields, which are either true or false, date fields, decimal fields. There's a bunch, if you use a Postgres database specifically, there's a whole set of extra fields you get in Django. I don't think they're listed here, but you can store things as JSON with a JSON field. So this is why I tend to use Postgres. You can create custom fields in Django. I went for years of using Django before I actually created a custom field, but it's another thing you can do. So if you want to play around later, you can create various additional fields. Cool. So let's take a look at views.py. Can anyone tell me the difference between this results view and this vote view? Yes, yes. One is a class-based view and one is a function-based view. So class-based views have a lot going on under the hood. They're really good for getting a whole bunch of behavior packed in by default. And I think Django does a really good job of identifying a lot of different use cases. So I find myself using class-based views a lot. When I use function-based views, it's usually because I'm doing something very, very small. For instance, I will use it sometimes if I have, if I'm making an Ajax query and I want to just give it a piece of, give it a piece of data and return true or false, and I need to make a simple call, I'll just create a function-based view to handle that. Or if I'm doing something really confusing, if I'm doing something really complex, I'll start with a class-based view usually, and I'll be like, okay, I need to override this method, I need to override that method, and somewhere around like the third or fourth method I'm overriding, I start thinking to myself, maybe I need to use a function-based view for this. But different people have different preferences. One of the best resources I know of for using class-based views is a site called Classy Class-Based Views. And it really helps you visualize what is actually what is actually happening with this view. So we were using the list view. So it lets us know all of the different, you can see the different things it's inheriting from. This part isn't, I never actually look at this, I'm just showing it to you now so you can see it. So you can see that this list view is inheriting from multiple mixins, multiple different places. The part that I actually use is this down here, where it shows all of the attributes of the view, and then it shows us the methods that are called by the view in more or less the order in which they're called. So for instance, remember from the urls.py when we had this call to list users view as view? So here you can see that method, this as view method. And we can expand it and we can see the different things that it calls. So you can see over here, it's calling self.get. And if you look down here, you can see that method get defined. So you can go into there and say, okay, what is it doing? So next it's calling get query set. So you can go down to get query set here. So with class-based view, ideally, you're identifying which method you're overriding, and you're overriding it, and that's all you need to do. You're not really following it around multiple methods. Like, if you're needing to follow something around through multiple methods, that's a kind of a warning sign that maybe the class-based views are wrong for this particular case. So let's take a look at, so we had, remember when we had in our template, we referred to this as user list. And it's like a pretty good name, but maybe you wanna refer to your variable by a different name. Like let's say you just wanna call it users. So how do you change the views so that it's providing this user list under the variable name users and not under user list? And this, if you have like a big template with like 10 different things going in, it's gonna be important to be able to give it a meaningful name. So we're gonna override a method. There's actually a really simple way to do this, which does not involve overriding a method, which is just changing this attribute here, context object name. And that's what we did in the official tutorial with the index view, where we called it latest question list. So this is actually, we can solve this very simply just by changing the attribute, but we're gonna go ahead and override the method because we can do a lot more with that. So we're just gonna start off by changing the name. So does anyone know what method on this list view we wanna override? Yes, we wanna override get context data. And you can find that by poking through and eventually getting to this point here. Or Or I often find the method I want by Googling and going to Stack Overflow, and they're like, oh, that's the method you want to override. It's like, it's not an easy process to identify which method to override a lot of the time. But tutorials, help websites, etc. So if you've got some methods just have a single thing here, so you can just copy and paste it to override and adapt it. Because getContextData has multiple mixins being used, I prefer to avoid that and just use this simple simple process, which is to do the method name and then just call super. So super gets whatever method you specify on the object that you've inherited from. I feel like you can go pretty far in life by just blindly calling super and hoping for the best. However, there's it's actually fairly complicated underneath the hood, and there's on your handout I put a link to a video from a previous PyCon, which a talk by Raymond Hediger, which just goes over how super works, including like a physical demonstration of people representing different objects being inherited from and passing control to each other. So I do recommend that. But for now, I also recommend just calling super and hoping for the best. A lot of times that works. So now we've gone ahead, we've called that method, we've done everything that the object we've inherited from wants us to do. And that method returns context. And context is just a dictionary that the view passes to the template, and so you can access anything that's in context from the template. So I'm gonna just to show you what's in context, I'm gonna do this kind of weird thing where I create a variable called display context, and I just put the context in it. So I'm putting the context in the context, so we can context while we context. And then I can display that just to show you what is actually happening in here. So I'm going to do display context. And when we do that, we get this. We get to see what's in the context. So the view that is calling the template always gets included in the context, as well as we see object list and user list, both showing the same query set. So I can go ahead and add something else to the views. So I can name context.users, and I can do user.objects.all to get the list of users again. And then I'll also add a call to users here. And so you can see a couple things here. First, it now displays this query set under users here. But notice that the user list variable continues to work. Unless we explicitly override the context object, for instance, if we we could say like context.userList and then set that to none. We could pop it out of the dictionary. If we did that, it wouldn't work anymore. But by default, it just stays there. So you can continue to refer to it by user list or object list. So just changing the name isn't all that exciting. We could have just used an attribute. But we can do whatever we want in here. So for instance, another thing we might do is we might create let's get rid of this display context. We could create a variable called staff. And we could get all of the users making a quick list here, list comprehension, if user is staff. So there's a field on the inbuilt user model that specifies whether or not someone is staff. And so I can use that to create a list of only staff members. And while I'm at it, I'm going to create a context, non-staff. I'm using an underscore here because the templates sometimes get mad at you for using dashes in variable names. So it's going to be virtually identical to the other list comprehension, except instead of if user is staff, I'll do if not user is staff. I'm going to change up my template to get rid of this display stuff. So let's create a little thing that says staff, and then a little thing that says non-staff, and then a third thing that says everybody. So we'll leave that there, but we'll make some copies of it. And so if staff for staffer in staff. Actually, let's call that user so we don't need to change the other things. Change that new staffers are available. You don't need to worry about precisely duplicating what I'm doing. But the goal is just to reference all of these separately. So if user in non-staff, no non-staffers are available. So I've got if staff for user and staff, if non-staff, and within that for user and non-staff, and then I've got my default one. When I display it, I get my 3 different versions. And so let's go ahead and add a non-staff member through the admin, just to make sure that this is working. So I'm going to go to the admin. I'm going to create a user. I'm going to call them, I'm going to call it Aaron. Aaron, you are not a staff member. I'm also going to have to go ahead and create that profile separately. Aaron is a great TA. And once you've added your user and profile through the admin, actually, we can see in the admin that this person is not a staff member. And when we go to polls/users, we can see that Aaron's showing up in the non-staff list, but they were both showing up in the everybody list. I'll go ahead and, I feel like the template is the area you're most likely to have gotten a little stuck, so I'll leave that up. And if you're not there yet, if you can, I don't know, put up the little pink thing or something, or pretty good. Cool. So now we've got our nice little user view. Let's also take a moment just to catch up. Yes. All right. I'm going to do this quickly, but without demonstrating to you. Let's create some polls, some choices for our polls, because we created our polls earlier. We created our questions, we didn't create any choices. And we're going to need that for the next part. So if you can go ahead and just add some random choices. Oh, that's not the template. That's the template. So Django comes with a built-in login system. There's like a number of things like the admin, the user model that Django comes with that can be save so much time and be so helpful. And the login system is one of those. So the login system is at django.contrib.auth. And that should already be in your installed app. So I'm just going to close out some of these for a second. I'm going to go to our settings.py. In settings.py, there's a list of installed apps. Every time you create a new app, you add it to your installed apps. Every time you add a third-party app, you add it to your installed apps. Certain things, these here, when you generate your settings.py file, these are already in there, so it's already set up, but just a reminder of how that works. And we can access those by going to the urls.py at the project level and adding references to those views. So let's import from the auth module. Import views. And we're going to import that as auth views because we are separately importing views from elsewhere, so just to give it a different name. We can add to our URL patterns 2 paths. We'll make a logout path as well. And so we're going to do something a little tricky here, which is we're just going to use the existing views. So we're not adding anything to views.py because they already exist. However, we're using these views and we haven't created them, so we don't necessarily know what's in them. So the responsible thing to do might be to go look in the source code and see what these views actually look like. But we're going to skip that. We're going to see what sort of assumptions are being made in these and how we can use the error messages to address them. I'm a big fan of error messages. So we've got these views. So we can go ahead and navigate to the login screen. And because this is at the My Site level, it's just the domain/login, not domain/polls/login. All right, so we're getting a template does not exist error. And you'll notice that it's specifying the template that it wants to exist. It's specifying that registration/login.html. So that's the default template that the auth view looks for. So let's take a look to figure out where we want to put this registration/login.html. Let's take a look at this thing right below it that says template loader postmortem. So the template loader loads templates in a specific order. It's starting with the templates at the project level. So you can see here, my site/template/registration. And if you go here, you see my site, this top level my site/templates. We have an admin, we don't have a registration. So it's not finding it there. So it's like, okay, never mind, next. And then it starts looking through the apps. So it looks through Django contrib admin, Django contrib auth, and the my site/polls. And if you look at that settings.py, why did I X out of it? There we go. If you look at that installed apps, you can see that that's the order in which they're listed in installed apps. Admin, auth, there's no templates in the others, and then polls. So if these had been in a different order, you'd see them going in a different order. I frequently find myself editing, well, frequently is rough. I have more than once found myself editing a template, being like, why aren't my changes showing up? And realizing that the template getting used wasn't the one I was editing, it was something further up in the template loader order. So to prevent some of these problems, templates are always referred to, not just with their name, but with the directory immediately preceding them. So in this case, registration/login. That's also part of why in our templates folder in polls, we've got this polls subdirectory. So that we're looking, when we want to get the detail view, we can get polls/detail.html. So that if we've got another app or a third-party app called, I don't even know, zebras, then we can look for the detail on the zebras in zebras/detail.html. So that's why you see it referred to with that directory. So let's go ahead and put this in at the project level, so we get it at that first pass, so it doesn't get overridden by. We know that there's no template in the auth view because it would have been found. But let's go ahead and put it in at the highest level so we know that it can't get overridden by anything else. So go to the templates, we'll add a directory, new directory. We'll call it registration because that's what the view looks for. And then we'll create a file called login.html. And I'm going to go ahead and create a little form here. We have our login prompt. We give the HTML information for a form. And then within that, we can use this little easy method. So form, you can actually do this just like this. As P just gives it a as P as paragraph. Each element ends up being on a separate line, so it looks a little nicer. Generally speaking, if you are creating forms, you're going to want to use like Bootstrap or some other nice CSS system. So if you do end up wanting to use Bootstrap, there's a package called Django Bootstrap, which makes it easier to use it in Django. Right, so we need a button so we can submit our form. And then we end our form. Great. So once we've got that all set, we can refresh, and now we've got our form. So you can go ahead and enter in your data, your name and password, and see what happens. Don't save. Our first error. Does anyone know what CSRF is? Yeah. So it's a type of attack. And Django provides a very simple method for protecting from this attack. And it makes sure you do it because it gives you errors when you have not done it. So every time you submit a form, you need to add a CSRF token. And you do that in the templates. CSRF token. With this simple command. Yeah? Yeah. There we go. So once you add that CSRF token, you might need to refresh and enter your data again. But once you do that, you should be able to log in and get a new, different error. Give you another few seconds looking at this. Yes. Right. So, so the auth view that we can't see is passing in that form via the context. Django also creates, by default, anytime you create, use something called the create view or the update view. These are both model form views. And if you just specify the model, it will, by default, create a form for that model using all of the fields in the model. You will often find yourself not wanting to use all of the fields in the model, in which case you'll have to create a custom form. But as a default, it's actually quite nice. And so there's more than a username and password on the user model. So the auth view is actually making its own custom form in order to present us this. But it's doing that all behind the scenes. So if you want to add additional fields to your login, then you might end up actually having to inherit from the auth view and make your own changes yourself. But for now, this suits me pretty fine. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And then, yeah. The login HTML, yes. Password. All right, so now we get our newest error. So our newest error says, hey, we can't find this page, but it's making this weird assumption, right? It's like we can't find /account/profile. It's like, well, why were you even looking for a /account/profile? It's looking for a /account/profile because the auth view, the default auth view, has what's called a success URL. Anytime you have a form view, the assumption on a form is that once you submit the form, you go to a new page. You can override that default, but because on so many pages, you want to go to a new page when you submit a form, it just assumes that that's what you want to do. But where do you want to go? There's no, it's hard to provide a reasonable default for that behavior. The auth view has chosen somewhat randomly /account/profile, which is a reasonable guess for where do you go after you log in as a user. But we don't have a /account/profile. So how do we change this to go where we want to go? I mean, we could create /account/profile. That's very reasonable, but let's skip that for now. Because this is part of the Django inbuilt system, the way to fix this and to override that default URL is to go into the settings. So we're going to go to the very bottom of the settings. You can technically put this anywhere, but I like to put my changes at the bottom. And we're going to change a variable called login redirect URL. So the login redirect URL by default is this /account/profile, and we're going to change it to something that actually exists in our project. So let's change it to that polls/users page. It's probably not where you'd actually want to put users for an actual project that you wanted people to actually use, but it's good enough for now. So now when we log in, oh, did I not save that? I totally did not save that. Put it here. Refresh it just in case. Unexpected. Oh, maybe? Maybe that's what's going on? Oh my goodness. Yeah. Let's try that. Refresh. There we go, it redirected. Sometimes restarting and refreshing is the best way to fix something you don't understand. Great, so now it's redirecting correctly. So we can also use the default logout system. We already added the URL for that in the urls.py. And we can make something a lot simpler for that. We can just create a file here. We can call it it's called logged out. When I was creating this tutorial, I spent a little while annoyed because I couldn't get it to work when I had it as a logout. But the default auth view is logged_out, which doesn't seem like it matches the other one, but such is life. And we can say anything. We can say, you're now logged out of the polls app. And then when we go to log out, we can just give this template. And because we're not doing anything too fancy with logout, we don't need to give it a redirect URL. We're just at the template. Cool. OK, so it would sure be nice to be able to keep track of whether or not we're logged in or logged out on the page. So let's create a little a little template here. We'll call it login bar. And it's just going to check whether or not we're logged in and display that to the user. So if user is authenticated, this is a nice helper method that the inbuilt user system has by default. Where is it? And if. So if we're logged in, we'll say, make it bold, logged in. And this we'll just say logged out. This isn't really going to come up again in the tutorial, but it's useful to know. Django has an object called anonymous user, which if you are logged out, that gets used by default. So if you're just referencing a user, the user in your code base, you won't get an error for that. And you can do things like if user is authenticated, and you won't get something saying, hey, there's no user at all, because Django provides anonymous user as a default. Okay, so we've got this little helper, but how do we actually use it in our templates? So we don't want to like copy and paste this and put it in every single template. So we're going to use something called a template include. So if we go to, for instance, we can go to our login page. This is a bit, it's a bit duplicative because it's already a login page, but we can do something include my site, or actually no, we're in registration /loginbar.html. And now we should be able to see that piece of template in our login. So you can see up here it says logged out because we just logged out. And now we can take this one line and we can copy and paste it anywhere where we want that to appear. So you can put it in login. We can put it in logout, even though should always be the same thing here. And we can go ahead and we can put it in our users view. We can put it in our detail view. We can put it in all of the views. Oftentimes you'll see this as like a nav bar that gets included. You can also do something, sort of the opposite of including is extending. So including is saying, here's this piece of code, put it on my page. Extending is saying, hey, take this already existing code and we're going to add this to that page. So a more typical thing would be to have like a base template that has like the nav bar, that has like the login and the logout, and your link to your profile. And then all of the other views just extend from that. So that's a bit more of a typical approach, but often if you have something that gets viewed like 4 or 5 times, you'll just put it as an include from those various places. So now we've got our little login helper, our little login bar helper in various places. All right, so we are currently logged out, great. So now that we've done all of that setup, we can use this to protect any page we want to so that you have to log in order to access it. And this is as simple as just adding a couple of lines to each view. And we do it differently for function-based views and for class-based views. So for function-based views, we use a decorator. So let's go to the views.py. Where are we? Let me create a little more space here. It's visible. So we're going to import up here from Django contrib auth decorators. Import login required. So actually, before we actually add this, let's just demonstrate, never mind, forget that last sentence. So we'll go to our one function-based view and add it as a decorator. So if we go to our list of polls, we've got what's your favorite Python library? I need to quickly make some choices for this. Let me quickly go to the admin. Shauna. And because I'm logged out, you'll notice that logging in and out does affect the admin. So choose a password you can enter quickly. So I'm going to add some choices here. So I'll add Python, of course, Ruby, Java, I don't even know. There we got some. Please correct the error below. Oh, I don't know why that disappeared. Oh, great. Okay. So let's now that we've got some actual options, go back to the polls. So I'm currently logged in, right? Because I logged into the admin. See, this is why you need the helper, because otherwise it'd be every time you go to the admin to add something. So I'm now logged out. So I want to demonstrate what this looks like when I'm logged out, when I try to access this login protected option. So I'm going to click Python, of course. So I clicked, and it says your current path account/login didn't match any of these. So once again, this is a case of the auth system specifying a default that we don't want to use. It said, okay, you need to be logged in order to access this view. I'm going to redirect you to the login page, and your login page is at account/login, which is almost exactly what we want it to do. So again, we need to go into settings.py and specify a different default. And this is called login URL. No, login URL. So it's the right. So we know that our login page is just at /login, but the auth views doesn't know that because it's a piece of the inbuilt Django system. So it assumes we're at account/login. So we give it our default, what we actually use as our URL. And then when we try to vote, it successfully redirects us to our URL. And then once you log in, it'll send us back to where we came from using this next parameter up here in the URL. We came from poll/1/vote, and it passes that along to the redirect. It handles all of it for us. So we log in. Apparently I mistyped that. There we go. So it hands us back in. It doesn't remember what choice we tried to select, but that's okay. And now we're successfully able to do it because we logged in. So that's how the decorator works. Once you've got, we came across a couple of additional fiddly bits to fix, but once we've got those fiddly bits fixed, password protecting a page is as simple as just adding this @login required decorator. So how do we do the same thing for a class-based view? It's very similar. We just use a mixin instead. So from django.contrib.auth.mixins, import login required mixin. And the way that you add any mixin to a class-based view is to add it to the list of things you're inheriting from. If you're inheriting from multiple things, you start having to think a little bit about method resolution order. And if you find yourself having to do that, I recommend that super video that I mentioned earlier. But often it's not an issue, and you can just do what should be password protect. Let's password protect the user's view, because why not? We can. We add the login required mixin to the list of things we're inheriting. let's, so we're logged in so we can easily access the list of, that's not the right list, this list of polls/users. But if we log out and go back to that polls/users, we get redirected to the login page. And again, this next parameter keeps track of where we were trying to get to. And once we log in, brings us back there. Huh. So we're going to break for snacks in exactly 10 minutes. So I'm going to get started on the next section, but we'll just randomly stop in the middle. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Yeah. Right, scroll up to the function-based, yeah. Yeah, so you need this, if you don't have, if I took away this, you'd see a little run. My IDA does that for me. But that's, it's part of the Django contrib auth, so it comes built in. Just gotta import it. And there's additionally, I didn't include this, but there's additional things you can do. There's a user passes test mixin, where you can have people, so the login required mixin just looks for if someone's authenticated. But user passes test mixin allows you to like simply specify that the user, like it could be say user is staff, user is account was created more than X days ago, user's name contains a queue. You can put any random test you want to in that user passes test. So you can do that as a decorator or mixin as well. I believe that's also inbuilt as well and not a third-party app. And it's another simple way to add functionality easily to a bunch of different views. Yes, yes. You can, for a user passes text mixin, you could do something like is user in group, because the inbuilt user in group system lets you easily check whether a user is in a group. If you wanted to do, there's also like additional stuff for like user and group management that this tutorial doesn't go over, but yes, there's a lot of that inbuilt that you can play around with. Cool, so yes, yeah, so you can also create your own custom decorators that either from scratch or like building off, like inheriting from a decorator that already does most of what you want it to do. That's something that like if you have like a more complex project where you want to just keep the logic somewhere specific and then simply add it to a bunch of different views, that's useful. Cool. So let's continue on. Let's add some comments to our app. I know you're thinking, oh man, a polls app. I want to leave a ton of comments on that, but so we're going to go back to our models.py. We're going to add yet another model. And let's go ahead and create some fields. So we want to add comments to our questions. Does anyone know what type of relationship field we should use? Could do a many-to-one. What is the alternate term for the many-to-one? Also true. Yes, there's the other name for that is a foreign key. Yeah, because it's actually called a foreign key. I don't know why that decision was made, but I mean, once you do this like, you know, a half dozen times, it'll just be easy to remember that foreign key means many-to-one. So every comment is only on a single question, but any given question can have multiple comments. We'll do author. We could require that the user be logged in to leave comments and then have this author also be a relationship field to our users or to our profiles. But I'm feeling lazy. And maybe we also want to allow anonymous comments. Nothing ever went wrong there with that. We can have our text, the text of our comments. And let's also have a date that it's created, which will help us to display the comments in a reasonable order. Sure. So a text field allows for slightly more formatting. Actually, if you go to the model field reference, it uses a different default form widget. So a character field will give you a single line, whereas you get a text area for text field. Actually, one of the things I recommend for projects where you're having anything facing a user is to use a third-party app to get a rich text field. And with those, then you can have, you can easily do like italics, bold, color, different font sizes, different font shapes, etc. Those you have to spend a little bit of time configuring, but it's usually worth the effort to give your users an easy way to give formatted text. And then we have to give it a default, so let's do time zone equals now. Great. So we've got our comment field with question, author, text, and created date. So what do we do next? We've created our model. Got to get it in the database. So, right. So I'm getting this error. Does anyone remember how to fix this? Yeah. So that looks like it's working now. I'm going to go ahead and make the migrations and migrate. And then we want to be able to potentially edit these comments. So what's a good way for us to do that as administrators is to add it to the admin. So we'll also, again, import from models and register in the admin. So now when we go to the admin, we can see these comments listed. So since we haven't actually made a create form yet, let's go ahead and just add some via the admin so we can view them before we work on making a form for ourselves. So the author could be anyone. Let's make the author Ashish. Python? Oh, okay. Did we put Rust on the list? We didn't put them.
That's a great comment. That's actually what I was thinking when you were writing this.
Great. And you can see our string representation leaves a little bit to be desired here. We'll do another question. Author and Python? The Aaron in my head is very excitable. Great, so now we've got our items added in the admin. So let's view them in the template. So we could create our own detail view for the comment, but we probably don't actually need to ever view the comment on its own. We want to see the comment with the question that it's commenting on. So we can go to the detail view, which is the detail view for No, that's not actually where I wanted to go. Yes. There we go. So we've got our question, and it's got its form that we can fill out the form, but we want to also display the comments. So we can put this down here. We could, in fact, create a template and then include it in the detail. So if we want to leave the same type of comments on polls, and we don't have anything else now, but if we want to be able to leave it on user profiles, and like you want to leave the exact same comment form, then you can just include it. But for now, we're just going to add it here. So I'm going to go ahead and type that out. And you'll see here this question.comment_set_all. The default way to view a related or to access a related object is the model name _set. And you can give it a related name variable or parameter when you're declaring the field, and then you can give it a special name. So you can make it be comments or and access it that way, but the default way is comment set. So I'm going to go ahead and type out a template. It is now 3 p.m., which is snack o'clock. So you can go ahead and get the snack and come back and then type it in, or type it in now and go get the snacks. But in any case, we're going to pick up again at 3:20. So just make sure, whatever you do, just make sure to be back here by 3:20. And feel free if you have questions and want to say anything in the interim. 3:20. All right, everyone. So it's 3:20. Presumably have some people trickle back in. So for the second half of this, we're going to try and use, I'm going to try and wait a little bit longer as we're doing these steps and you're following along. And to do that, we're going to use the green stickies more. So if everyone can take your green/blue stickies off of your computers, and I'll be more direct with asking you to put them on or off as needed. All right, so I have put this template for the comments in. If you have copied this down on your version, please put your green sticky up. And if not, get typing. All right, so yes, although the checkouts are slightly wrong, unfortunately. So I assumed that when you cloned the repository, you cloned all of the branches. Turns out that's not true, and turns out there's not an easy way to fix that, despite that seeming like a really useful thing for Git to include. So if you do want to catch up via the Git checkouts, instead of just doing like Git checkout branch 3 logins, I think is the name of it. You have to do a different syntax, which is git checkout -b. -b creates a new branch when you check out. That's what that flag is for. The name, which can actually technically be anything. Oh my goodness, what is happening? Wow. It's so beautiful. All right. Let me try that again. Where am I? Source vn bin activate. All right. Git checkout -b branch name, whatever you want to call it, and then you have to do origin to get the remote, and then you have to do branch 1 or branch 3/logins, and so that'll get it from the remote copy. Really? I cannot update paths and switch to branch. All right, fine. I will do git pull. See, it's more complicated. Origin branch 3 log. What is the branch name? It did? See, when I do that, it doesn't show anything. So unfortunately, my handy little catch-up mechanism is a bit more complicated. But if you do git fetch, it might, for some percentage of you, successfully get the branches, in which case the instructions will work. So good luck. And feel free to try. And if you want to catch up now, Erin and Ashish can go around and help you if you to use this git checkout, I guess, origin branch 3. No, I made it separately so I'd be on the same page as you guys. I don't want to get separate errors from you. Oh, I have to stash things? Sure, I can stash things. So git stash. Oh my goodness. Git stash. And do git checkout. The following untracked changes. Okay, so we're going down a path of unfortunateness. But if doing git fetch worked, then you can.
So I was mostly asking. So what I did was I just made a new virtual environment, full manually.
Oh yeah, you can create an entirely new repo and not worry about it.
Made too many changes in early branch.
Yeah. So if you want to just catch up to a new version, you can just create an entirely new, like CD somewhere else, like do the git clone, and then do the check out that branch. And then you don't have to worry about stashing your changes or worrying about that. I'm going to get my stash back. And we'll keep going. So we've got our comments here. So now when we go to polls, we can see our comments here listed out. Now, let's say in the admin, you had a comment. What's your favorite programming language? And it was more than one line long. So for instance, let's say, here, William Carlos Williams, and you've got a comment that's like a poem. You're leaving a poem comment. When you display the comments, you can see that unfortunately the vital spacing of our user's poem comment has been lost. And so there's a number of what are called template filters that Django provides to you that can rescue some of that formatting. And the way these usually look is just a pipe and then the name of the filter. So the filter that fixes this line break issue is helpfully called line breaks. And it's inbuilt, so you don't need to import it from anywhere. And now, when we refresh the page, we get the formatting we want. There are a variety of different things. So that I think there's one, I think it's title. No, title case. A lot of filters are used on strings, so you get, no. Invalid filter, have I spelled it wrong? Is it just title? Yes, so now it's that slightly annoying like title case sentence that no one ever wants to see. You can also do provide a variable to some of the filters. So for instance, there's the truncate chars filter, which truncates your string. And you can give it a set, like a number of characters to truncate to. So for instance, if we give it 20, then it'll display for us the first 20. If we give it 10, it'll display for us the first 10. And this is really useful if you want to give people like let's say you have a people's bio or a description of something. You want to give people a huge amount of space to say whatever they want. But if you're giving people like a preview of the description on a list, then you can say truncate to 40 characters or however big the sort of display that you've got has. Yes, let's try it. Let's go with title. Yes. So in addition to template filters, there's also something called template tags. Template tags do a lot more than filters. They can in fact do pretty much anything. That is a power that you want to use wisely. So most people, as you get bigger and bigger projects that you're working on with more and more people, you want to separate, you want to have, limit the number of places where certain actions can be done. So for instance, many people say you want to keep as much business logic as possible in the models or in libraries that are referenced only from the models. People try to keep logic out of the views and especially out of the templates. And because template tags are referenced from the templates, I guess they're not technically in the templates, but you can end up having, if you're not careful, you can end up having to guess, okay, someone made this change. It could be in the models, it could be in the views, it could be in the template tags, or it could be in libraries like referenced from any of those places. And that's a lot of different things to juggle. So my default is to try not to use template tags, even though they can be very useful. It's not like saying never use them, but like basically make sure that the only way you can accomplish what you need to accomplish is through the template tags. And if you can put it in models.py or even views.py, try to do that first. But so you can use so we've been adding our comments through the admin panel, but we want people who are not staff to be able to leave comments. So let's create a comment form for people to leave comments. So thinking through, as we add this, thinking through what the user is going to experience, the first thing they're going to want to do is go to the view for adding a comment. Let's start with our urls.py, adding a add comment view. Right. We're actually going to do, because we need to know which view, question we're adding a comment to. We're going to create a view. We'll call it create comment view as view, and we'll give it a name. Add comment. Wow, that got long. Let me take a second to scroll that out for you. Man. Why are you there? No, go away. There you go. You want that final comma. And it's giving me, my IDE is giving me my error saying, create comment view doesn't exist, which makes sense because I have not yet created it. So let me get that back. So we'll go into the views and do a create comment view. Create comment view. And we're going to use a generic view of the subclass of edit views called create view. And this is an inbuilt class-based view that I know about. You could alternatively use a form view, which is more common if you're updating as opposed to creating. But since most of the time when you're accessing the comment form, you're just creating a comment and not editing it, we'll use this as our default. And as with previously, we want to do model, specify our model, which in this case is comment. We need to specify a template. Getting my little red squiggly, which means I need to import the comment. Model. Up here. And if we go to add comment, should get some helpful error messages. So we get an error saying the fields attribute using model form mixin, which is added to another view in order to create this form view. This create view. Create view is created with model form mixin, which is something that you can see here. That it's one of its ancestors is model form mixin. It can be a little confusing to see this because you're not explicitly using the model form mixin. So like seeing it as an exception, you might be like, what's happening? So that's why. And it's saying there's no, you have to specify the fields attribute. So this is specifying what fields you want to include from the comment model. So let's just go ahead and add all of them: question, author, text, created date, the 4 fields. And now that we've specified that, when we refresh, our template is, yes, we need to actually create the template. So we can do a new file, add comment.html. And we can do something very similar to the previous form where we've got our help text for the viewer. And then we've got our form method. And then we've got our CSRF token to prevent attacks. We've got the form itself. And then we've got our submit button. So form, HTML, form, content, CSRF token, and submit button. Give you a second to handle that. Now that we've got that, when we refresh, did I misspell that? Yes, I totally misspelled that. All right, so I told you to name it add comment, but it's totally comment_form. So renaming it. Alternatively, you could change what you call it in the template. They just need to match is all. So now that I've renamed that, it should find the template. That is coming up next. So we just need to, we're just going to finish getting it to work regularly, and then we'll go right into pre-populating. So for now, let's just attempt to add a comment and see what happens. So when you add a comment, it says there's no URL to redirect to. So this is what we talked about before with a form. Once it's finished, it automatically assumes it needs to go somewhere else. But in this case, it doesn't have a default of where to go. So we need to define the get success URL. And we can do that here in the view. We can do that either through specifying a success URL here. But that only works if we want one success URL for any time this view is used. So like if we were going to just go to the list of polls every time you added a comment, that's great. You can just add that there. But if you're adding a comment to a specific poll, a specific question, you probably want to go back to that question once you've added your comment. And so there's no way to specify that through the success URL attribute. So you have to override the get success URL method. And you can use reverse, the reverse utility in Django, to specify which view you're looking for. So we want to go to the detail view of the polls. And we want to pass in the ID of the poll that we're going to. So, okay. Equals no works. And the QArg we want is the pk self.object.question.id. And so what's happening here is Once we've created the comment, it is connected to a question. So we can therefore say, take myself, in this case, the self.object is the comment, get the related question, and get that question's ID or PK, in this case, and pass that along to urls.py. So now we're accessing urls.py not by giving it a path through the URL bar, but by finding polls, finding the thing labeled detail, so through the name, and then giving it the PK that's going to go here to specify which detail view. And that way we can give it a specific success URL for this specific question. Folks, so now when we add the comment, we get redirected. And you can see that there's actually now 2 versions of this comment, because the first time the comment was created, we just had an error with the success URL. So it got added to the database. So when we did it again, we made another copy of the comment, which is how you end up with duplications in your database. So try not to do that in production. Good rule for any error. So okay, so we've got the basic field working, but there's a lot of stuff in this comment form. Actually, let's add a quick link in this detail view to link to add new comments, so we don't have to give the user a quick way forward. So yeah, let's call it. So we're saying look for the view. Oh, no, correct. It's not do double quotes. All right, so we're saying look in the polls app for the path named add comment. And then we're just giving it the parameter question.id to get to the correct place. And then finishing out this helpful thing, and then we go comment. And so you can see how now we can change like the specific URL that goes into that path, but we don't have to come back into detail.html and change anything. So these URL helpers and the templates and in the views make it so you only have to change it in one place, which is super helpful, especially when you have larger projects. So now we have our add comment form, but okay, we're coming from this specific question. We don't want the user to have to like go ahead and select this, right? So how do we pre-fill this out for them? So to do this, we're going to have to customize the form that gets used. So if you go into the views, this is a class of form view using the model comment. And so it's just creating a form for you without you having to do anything. If you want to create a custom form, you're going to have to go ahead and specify it. And to do that, we start by creating a file at the, let me make this bigger for a second, at the level of polls called forms.py. So it should be at the same level as models.py, views.py, urls.py. So we're gonna, let me get this back. We're gonna import forms. We're also gonna import our model. we're going to create our custom form, and it's going to inherit from model form. So the forms.model form does do a whole lot of things by default. So we're still taking advantage of a lot of what Django does, but we're going to create we're going to tweak it slightly. So with this, we need to go into meta, the meta subclass, and specify there what model we want to use. So we're saying this is a model form, and it's based off of the model comment. And if you don't do that, you'll get an error. And then you'll know to do it. We'll also again specify our fields. Now we could choose not to include question here because we don't want to show it to the viewer or to the user. But if we do that, when we try to actually add our comment to the database, we're going to get an error because the question is a required field, and it'll say, well, we don't know what question it is. So we need to find a way to tell Django what question to use without having to ever bother the user with it. So to do that, we override the init method on this model. And as with the last time we overrid a method, we want to still call super to accomplish all of the nice initializing that we don't want to do by hand. So we're initializing like we did before. We just want to add a little bit. So we want to add the ID of the question we're linked to this form. So let's assume that we're passing that information in from somewhere. We'll figure out where we're getting it from in a moment. But we'll pass it in to the init function from somewhere. And if we have successfully passed it in, we will set the field in question we will set its attribute initial to the value that we got passed in. So we've got a dictionary on this form called fields. And we can use the key value, which is the name of the field, to access the dictionary for that specific field. And we can get the attribute initial to specify the initial data. But okay, so where is this coming from? So in a function-based view, you just call the form, and so you can just pass the form when you're instantiating it. You can pass this information. But we're using a class-based view, which means we need to override the method that handles instantiating the form. And that method happens to be getForm keyword-args, QArgs. So again, calling super. And then after we've gotten the normal QArgs that come from the thing we're inheriting from, we're also going to add this question PK. All right, but still, how do we know what the question is? When you create a view, it passes in the keyword arguments from urls.py to the view. So this here gets passed in as a keyword arg to whichever view is specified. So you can use self.qargs and get the PK. And whatever name it is just going to be the name that's specified here. So if instead of PK it was like question name or username or whatever the variable name is, the variable name here matches from here to here. So you're grabbing it from the URLs, sticking it in this keyword args dictionary, and then behind the scenes, the create view will instantiate the form and now use this updated QArgs. And then we need to also do return QArgs. Because as you can see from this super call, the method is returning a dictionary called QArgs. So we need to return it as well when we override it. Okay, so now we've gotten the ID from the URL, we've put it in the dictionary, and the forms should have grabbed it from the dictionary that the view has passed it in. And so, when we refresh this, no, what's going on? Let's try this. Shouldn't need to. Ah, yes.
Can't you use get initial instead of using a constructor? And then use get initial in the form view?
Question PK, question PK. I'm not sure exactly what you're suggesting. Say.
Well, no, in that when you're populating the form initially, there's a get initial function at the end of the phone number, which is where you populate the default values instead of doing that.
Oh, is there a? I do not know that off the top of my head. Yeah, so that's an alternative way. So an additional way to specify the initial data is to override get initial. Get form QArgs should work though. Yep. Yeah, so if you misspell the method, you're not going to get an error for it because it's just never going to get called, but it's perfectly reasonable to create a method that never gets called. And so this is can be slightly more annoying to debug. It's nicer when, great. See, when you get an error, you at least know what's going on. So init gets an unexpected keyword argument question PK. Did I misspell something? Shush. Get form line 33. I do not know. All right, well, let's, rather than going down this path, which is probably a very minor error because it worked on the previous run through. Oh, I wonder if, let's actually, let's pop question PK equals.
When you're doing a super, do you also want to specify the question PK is?
Yeah. So usually you want to don't want to give super anything it's not expecting. So if we pop this out, maybe it'll stop complaining about being given in something it didn't expect. Nope. All right. I'm not sure exactly what's going wrong here, but I don't want to spend time that we could spend learning something else. So let's go to the alternate method, which is overriding getInitial here. So go here. We'll comment this out for now, a theory that we shouldn't use it. And we'll also comment this out in case we want to go back. And let's take a look at what self.initial usually looks like. And so when you do a print statement in a view, it's usually going to show up here. So there's no additional data. So we'll create this. And we'll create initial. The form we want to use is so the field we want to add is question. Oh, no. Then we want to use that self-qargs.getPK. And try return initial. See if this works. No. All right. Let's retreat to the Stack Overflow and Google option, which is, so let's go to get initial.
Actually, I looked that up, and it's actually, you're specifying the super instead of doing the function that you would call, when you get initial equals super, and then your class, and then.
So once you do that, you don't need to do the other override?
No, when you're under getInitial, when you're overriding getInitial, you say initial equals super, whatever your view is on a self.getInitial.
Okay. There we go. Initial. Looks like there's no QArgs to give it. Great. All right. Initial my form field 1 return initial. Okay, maybe it's not something that's wrong with the view.
It worked on my view and get initial just now.
Okay. Okay. Maybe let's ignore this. Okay. With this exact same.
Yeah, but I had the NF function not commented out in the form.
That
So that's that I
seems duplicative. This is one of the best parts. All right, well, it's not a workshop if nothing goes wrong. Okay, so well now we're learning about multiple different ways you can handle this. I'd actually be interested to see if when you commented those out, it keeps working. Because if you're setting the initial value here, you shouldn't actually need to override it in the form. out of curiosity. Right. Oh my goodness. Sorry guys, I figured it out. All right, so, well, if it's working for you, maybe I didn't figure it out, but you'll notice that this view, I've created this special comment form. I have not told the view anything about using my special comment form. So, so there's no reason for the view to be using this thing that I've created here. So when I got rid of this, because hey, it's specified here in the comment form, it gave me an error message because it doesn't know anything about the comment form. So let's just see what happens when I import the comment form. And then I don't actually need to specify the model here, nor do I need to specify the fields. I should be able to just specify form_class comment form. And that's what should tell the views to use the special customized form. All right. And then we need to use template name instead of template. That's fair. That's fair. Tuple object has no attribute get. Okay, because now we've done all sorts of weird things in an attempt to debug this. All right, let me just try commenting this out. Well, we should be able to do both, but let's try it the way I had it working when I did my test run. So now, tuple object has no attribute get. That shouldn't make a difference. All right, so tuple object has no attribute get. Oh, that's somewhere deep down in the depths of. All right. So, but I know where I'm using get, which is here. But that's normal. Oh. Get form as self. Create view. Boy, this is so much more exciting than previous version. Response get. All right, let's. All right, for now, let's just make it work entirely. All right, so now we've got that, and it looks weird because it's not got SP. I'm going to put that back. All right. So, and comments. Let's just print self. Since it's saying it doesn't have QArgs, let's see what it does have. Unexpected keyword argument question. Dear Lord. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Okay. Let's use this get initial. Yeah. There we go. All right. So this is a way to handle just adding in initial data. So the way we finally got this working has any customization to the form itself actually skipped out. So instead, we're not actually doing anything here. So we should be able to do this with model and fields specified in the comment view like with before without using the form class. Because all we're doing is interceding in this one method that creates the initial values here. However, there might be more customization that you want to do. For instance, you might want to set the, so now we've got this pre-filled out here, but there's no reason that the user needs to even see this at all. So you can also customize your form to hide things. And if you do that with the, why isn't that working? Okay. So this won't actually entirely work, but I'll show you the syntax for it. So if you want to hide this, you would do self.fields.question, and then instead of accessing the initial attribute, you'd access something called widget. And you'd use the hidden input widget. And you frequently will end up using initial and widget together whenever you, so if you wanted to have a pre-filled author so that if a user is logged in, the comment is automatically associated with them, then you do something similar with if author underscore PK self.fields.author, and you do something similar where you'd set the initial and you'd also set the widget to be hidden. But sometimes you just want to give people a prompt, but you want to let them switch it, in which case you'd show the initial, but you wouldn't hide it. I am going to do a total hack in order to make this work. This is cheating. However, we happen to know the PK of the thing we want. So I don't know why why the self.qargs doesn't let you do get, and I don't really know how to fix it, but I know how to hack around it. Yeah.
On your forms, it says self.fields.
Oh yeah. Who doesn't like a fiend? All right, so this should be a perfectly workable workaround. Wait, weird. All right, so it's not that get, it's a different get, it's this get? So, unfortunately, sometimes errors are not super helpful in telling you what's going wrong. Name? I don't know. I do not know. Is it this? I do not understand, but okay, great. It's fixed. We don't know why, but it's fixed. In retrospect, can I undo this? Yes. All right. So it was something to do with passing in the args and qargs incorrectly, which I only changed because I made an error earlier on. So this is a nice demonstration that no matter how long you spend on Django, you'll still have random errors that you don't know how to fix and then make worse by changing random things. So there we go. All right, so let's go through what the actual working version looks like, because we've now tried like 6 different options. So, okay. So we have this get initial here, which I've commented out, which is a great way to handle just initial data. But if you want to make more complicated changes, you can create a custom form, which you specify. You import it up top, and then you put it under the attribute name form class. And then you can override get form QArgs if you need to. Your customization might not need data passed in, but if you do need data passed in, you can get it. Add it to the QArg dictionary, and then access it in the init. And so here, once we've done the super call, if we've got that passed in, we can set that to initial and we can hide it from the user. And now once we do that, and we have press send, and then it should work. And so there's two main things you're going to end up overriding with forms. One is the initialization. You change help text. You can change what initial data you see, whether it's displayed. Oftentimes, you'll use third-party libraries to make your forms like more interesting and better for the users, and those might require some custom input. But the other main thing that people end up using is to override the save method. And I don't have an example for that right now, but it'll look very similar. And as with many other things in Django, there's multiple ways to handle this. So with your form view, there is a post method. And that post method will call form is valid, and that usually sends you into the custom form where you can make changes. But sometimes you don't actually need to go into the custom form. You can grab the data out there in the view and use it. But most of the time you're going to end up, if you want to do something custom. But then again, because it's a model form, you might also end up in the models overriding the save method of the model. So where you end up making that change is going to depend on like logically where it belongs. You end up overriding the form method for the save if it's something distinct to that specific user interaction. So for instance, if you've got a profile and there's like, or if you've got a comment and you might have a view where people moderate comments and maybe they edit comments or delete them. And you might have a comment, an edit comment form, and you might have a create comment form. So that's 3 different types of forms. And if you want to override this, if you want anytime you touch that model something and save it something to happen, then you would override the save method on the model. But if you want something to happen only in the specific case of maybe every time a new comment is created, you want to send a specific notification to a specific moderator, but you don't want to do that if the comment's updated for whatever logic reason, then you could do that in the overriding the save method in the form. Of course, you can use multiple forms and multiple templates. I mean, basically, it's like it's a craft. It's an art, not a science. Cool. So we have 24 minutes. So let's go through the last 2 sections, which are kind of mini sections, just to cover them. And then if you have any additional questions about these forms. Did everyone like finally understand where we were going with this? Sorry to take such a circuitous route. Cool. Okay, so I want to take a moment to talk about databases. So we've been using SQLite. And SQLite is a great database format for small beginning projects because it's just a file. It's just a file. You can keep it in your repository, and so it can get versioned, like the actual data itself can get versioned along with your code. It's super easy to set up. In fact, you don't need to do any additional setup other than having it installed somewhere in your computer when you start Django. But it's not, it isn't great when you're doing a lot of writes to your database, and it's not great with simultaneous users. It's also, you can't use it on a site like Heroku, because Heroku doesn't let you, it doesn't let you make permanent changes to files in the system. You can write a file, but there's no guarantee at any point whether it'll still be there. And that's just the way that Heroku works. But I tend to use Heroku a lot for projects, and so I find myself switching out. And so when you switch out, how do you do that? So any other database that you switch out, you're going to need to do a little bit of setup. I'm not going to walk you through that right now, but you can, Google like how to set up a Postgres database or how to set up a MySQL database. And when you do that, once you've created, once you've installed the database and installed the tool, created the database, and created a super user and given them a password, then you can provide that information to Django. And all you should need to do is edit the settings.py file. So if you go down to, there's already a variable there with databases, so you can see it's set to SQLite 3. You don't need to follow along. Well, actually, you know what? I'm just going to, rather than type it all out, I'm going to see if it's got Postgres. So here's an example for Postgres. You can see there's quite a bit more information because we've got to specify. I'm going to comment that out because we're just playing around with this. So you can see here there's a bit more information, some configuration information. But does anyone feel a little bit weird about just having this information right here? Because this settings.py file, you need to track it in Git. You're probably going to send it back up to GitHub or Bitbucket or wherever you got your code stored. So it's basically anyone in the world can access this, which if it's just your toy project on your laptop is probably not a big deal, but if it's code you're running in production, you probably don't want everyone to know your password into your database. So there's a number of different ways to do this. Probably the one way is to set an environmental variable and then to use this OS system to import the environmental variable. Another thing you can do is to create a file. You can name it something like secrets.py. Sure. Yeah. Don't track it, and otherwise you're just having the exact same problem again. And then you can set your database password to secrets. And then you can import, so from secrets import database password, and then you can use this here. And this is usually my this is like my reasonably secure method. And I'll use this for any project that I'm just working on for myself. So if I'm just throwing something up on Heroku, and I just there's not a real threat model for anything. If you have a real business or something or there's a real need for secrecy, there's a number of more advanced password configuration tools where you don't have to worry about the password still being in plain text on your system. And they make it easier to manage the environmental configuration variables. But this is a pretty good system for anything where you're not super worried. So way back when we made our user profiles, every time you added a user, you had to go in and add a profile by hand, which is not the most convenient thing in the world. So Django has a system to help you to automatically do X when Y happens in a sort of disconnected way. And that system is called the signal system. So there's two elements to a signal. There's the sender of the signal and the receiver of the signal. And Django sends a number of signals automatically. So every time a new model is created, so when you add a new row to the database, it sends out a pre-save and a post-save signal. There's a variety of other signals, but that's 9/10 of the time, no, 95/100 of the time or something, some very large number of the time, it's just the save signals that you care about. I'm going to switch this back since I don't want to actually bother setting up Postgres. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up so that when a user is created, we automatically create a profile for that user. And since we've provided a default for that bio field, there shouldn't be any problems with us not knowing what to put in it, because we'll just have that default, and then the user can update it later on when they edit it. So we'll go into, if you've got a number of signals, people will often put this in its own signals.py file. But we're just adding one, so I'm just going to put it here under the profile. So let's go up here and import the tools we need. So from Django.database.models.signals, import post save. I almost always do post save. There are some cases where you want to do pre-save because you might. I'm not sure I've ever used pre-save. I'm sure there's a use case. There must be a use case because people added a signal for it. And then we also want to get our receiver. So that's a decorator that we can use. You don't have to use this receiver decorator, but it eliminates a couple lines of code. So let's do it that way. So with this receiver decorator, we need to specify what we're receiving. So first we're going to specify that we're using the post save signal, but we need to tell it what thing we want to get the signal for. We don't want to get the signal for like a comment being saved or a question being saved. We want to specifically know that the sender is the user. And then, so we know we're a receiver for post save using user, but what do we want to actually do? So then we put this function specifies what we actually want to happen. So I'm going to give it its names, save profile, but you can call it whatever you want, depending on what the function actually is. Actually, maybe I should call it create and save profile. And we pass in a set of values or a set of arguments. And Django knows that a lot of the times what you care about is not just that it's saved, but also whether or not it's created. So it passes in this created argument to make it easier for people to do that. So we can say if created, because we don't want to create a profile every time the user is saved. Then we want to do profile objects create to create and save an object. And the user is the instance that's passed in. So the sender is the model, and then the instance is the instance of the model. Let's give it things. And so now if we go to the admin, why are you mad? Oh, I see. There we go. All right. So now we have our profiles, and it's just me and Aaron hanging out by our lonesome. So we add a new user. Let's call that add Ashish as a user. So we've added Ashish, and now when we go check on the profiles, we also have a profile created for Ashish, and it gets created by default. Every once in a while, you might find yourself with a signal. So like, let's say you do this, you might find multiple profiles added. Well, you might get an error, I guess, because it's a one-to-one field, so it wouldn't be able to create multiple. But in the past, I have used signals and I've gotten duplicate data because sometimes for whatever reason, the signal system will just send things multiple times. And so to fix this occasional problem, you can also pass in if it's a problem for you, just pass in a UUID, which is another keyword. And that's a unique ID for the signal. And so if there's a duplicate, they'll have the same UUID. And so then you can say, if the UUID that's associated with this object already exists. So it's a somewhat common problem with a built-in solution. But I have no idea how to make this problem appear, because I don't really understand why it appears whenever it does appear. But when you get weird duplicates with your signals, use the UUID parameter. Cool. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. I'd love to hear some of your questions. Yeah.
Where do I look for the UUID? Is that stored somewhere?
So it's passed. So the how I believe it works is Django signals UUID. It is stored in the database as like part of Django, and then, no, why isn't it? Maybe it's called dispatch UID. Maybe I'm leading you astray. Okay, so you can create a UID in your sender and then look for it in your receiver, but we're using the inbuilt signals, and so they should have an inbuilt UUID. All right. So let's ask the documentation. Listening to signals. Yeah. Yeah, I don't actually know. Yeah. Oh, not UUID? Why did I think it was? Okay. Okay, so the end result is your receiver function will only be bound to the signal once for each dispatch UID value. Okay. All right. So I think I think I misspoke about how this UID works. And so you give it a unique identifier, and then it only calls it once because it must internally track which identifiers have been used. In conclusion, if you're interested in signals, read more about it and don't just trust my brief summary. So on your handouts, there's a wrap-up section where I list a couple of things that you might also be interested in learning about that we didn't get to. One of these is through relationships. So when we have our relationships here, our one-to-one or many-to-many fields, all we're tracking is that the relationship exists. But there might be additional data that you want to store on those relationships. So for instance, let's say you've got users that can have relationships to other users. you might only care about whether or not those relationships exist, but you might also care, maybe you want to let people mute a relationship or have a one-way follow or specify that the relationship is of a specific kind, like parent-child or brother-sister or what have you. If for whatever reason you want to add data to the relationship, you create a separate model for that that looks something like, class, let's call it question comment field or relationship. And it's a model like any other, and it has links to both of, in this case it would be question and then a relationship field, and comment and a relationship field. And then you can add any additional, date created or, approved, muted, whatever you need. And you can access all of the things that the models provide you. So then on the relationship, you can have a special method to do something with the relationship. For instance, at one time I had I was doing user-user relationships in an app, and I wanted to have the ability to sort of toggle the relationship from, on to off or off to on. I don't remember exactly why, but you can create a method, and then you can just directly make that change from the relationship. Another thing I mentioned before is rich text fields. The number of third-party apps. It sometimes takes a little while to configure it and to get it working in the templates, but I've also done it with just a couple minutes. So depends on which one you use and what you're using it for. Another common thing that people branch out with is in creating APIs, and they've got a great third-party app for that, the Django REST framework. The documentation on that is great as well. There's a full tutorial. If you're interested at all in creating APIs, I recommend just, and you should be ready at this point to just go straight through it. You learn some interesting things there about things like serializers. There's also, you probably want to make your app look a lot nicer than what we've been doing. I always default to using, oh right, because I just made nonsense here. So Bootstrap is a really solid choice, and there's a Django Bootstrap third-party app. And it lets you, using that lets you do this sort of simple template stuff like this little form thing with Bootstrap. So it, instead of looking like this by default, it looks like a nice default Bootstrap form by default. And then, if you still have to override stuff if you want to make it look like, not exactly like Bootstrap, but it's a great first step. Are there other things people are interested in doing with Django that people here might know of good third-party libraries or what have you? Yeah.
There's a cool thing that I've done is, I do a lot of authenticating to third-party APIs, and you can actually mess with the backend's .py file, do a custom authentication, so it bypasses the user model, and so you can authenticate remotely and then set up, maybe just create a model, a record based on the authentication that comes back or whatever, or maybe just use a single user that proxy it or whatever. But that's really kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, so you can still use a lot of the tools from the inbuilt system, but change the backend so you're customizing it that way. There's also, I'm forgetting the name of it. There's a great third-party app that does what's the term for it? Like open authentication, open IDs? Yeah, OAuth. Yeah, there's a Django-OAuth maybe. That it's pretty straightforward to let people sign up and log into your account with a Facebook account or a Twitter account or any Django-OAuth, yeah. All auth. Yeah. There's a lot of great third-party apps out there.
REST framework. They also have a library that you can put into installed apps for integrating with Swagger, so it automatically documents your API for you.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I guess I will say that out loud so that anyone watching it. So with Django REST framework lets you lets you tweak a configuration setting, or what is it? Oh, it just automatically works with Swagger to do to auto document your API, which is pretty sweet. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So if you actually look here at the very bottom of your handout, recommended resources, 2 Scoops of Django is a fantastic Django book that's sort of great for the level. I mean, I continue to use it, but it was especially great when I was, I'd done maybe a project or two and I'd like done the official tutorial. Like, it's great for both learning about a lot of these things that you'll end up using a lot, and also starting to think about things like, where should there's so many options for where I should make this change or where I should put this code. Like, what are the arguments for putting it in the views versus putting it in the models, or like architectural type decisions that can help you make choices that you won't regret years down the line. Hopefully, anyway. I don't tend to use cookie cutter. I know a lot of people who like it though. I tend to forget it creates a lot of stuff that I don't know what it is and I forget about, and then it's there and I'm like, did I do that? And then, so I like when stuff is there, like knowing that I added it for a reason. But I also have a relatively high patience for like painstakingly just redoing something every time I start a new project. So if you're less bothered by things existing that you don't know what they are or why they're there, and more bothered by doing like tedious installing of things and configuring of things, then cookie cutter is a great tool for you. So it's more of a personal preference thing on my end. Any other questions? Well, feel free to grab me after the talk or at any point during the conference. I'll be around for the whole thing. Yeah? Yes. So if you have any feedback, and please feel free to give constructive feedback. This is my second time ever doing the talk, so there's plenty of room for improvement, I'm sure. I would love to get your feedback. You can put it on the green Post-it note. And then if you run out of room, you could also put it on the red Post-it note. And if you need even more room, you can get more Post-it notes. Feel free to take as many Post-it notes as you want. But yes, thank you for coming. I hope this was helpful for you. And thank you to Ashish and Aaron for TAing.